For today's video, I'm going to fully explain and show you a simple way to cycle a new fish tank from scratch using my new Medaka rice fish aquarium as a live step-by-step example of the process. This video is intended for absolute beginners, so I will be explaining everything step by step, but everything will be timestamped so you can skip ahead if you like. The method that I'm going to be featuring in this video is called the dark start method, and it's very popular on the aquascaping side of the hobby. The main advantages of this method is that it helps grow the beneficial microorganisms that deal with toxic ammonia and toxic nitrite before you actually introduce any livestock to the tank, such as fish, shrimp, snails, or even plants. Another way to look at this is that we are going to add an artificial bioload to simulate fish waste to feed the required microorganisms that we need for a safe cycle before the fish are even in the tank, so nothing is at risk. When done correctly, this means that your aquarium is far safer for your aquatic pets and plants when you actually add them. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that this is the only or even the best way to cycle an aquarium. There are a lot of different methods out there that all get to the same destination, but this is just the one that I personally prefer. Even if you do choose to use a different cycling method in your own aquarium, there may be still some helpful tips in this video that can help you. However, there are a few downsides of this method. The first one is that you have to decide to use the dark start method right at the beginning of the tank setup, because it can have problems if you've already added fish, shrimp, certain snails, sensitive plants, or even hardy plants that come in vitro cups. The second downside is that this method can take anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks to complete depending on your specific aquarium, but in my experience it's usually complete somewhere between week 4 and 5. Later in the video I will share some tips on how you can potentially speed things up, but again, everything is timestamped so you can easily find the different sections. I do want to quickly talk about the required duration for this particular method, because I often mention it in my videos and say that it usually takes around a month for me to cycle a new tank from a standing start. Because of that, I do tend to get a lot of comments questioning whether the 1 month duration is really necessary, with people claiming they can cycle a tank faster with other methods. Now, I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, and that's why I've blurred out the names in these screenshots, but I do want to make an important point. I reply to every YouTube comment, and when someone challenges the duration of this cycling method, I simply reply asking how they know my tank's water temperature and pH level, because both of these are important factors for cycling speed. I've seen plenty of comments like this over the last few years, and until just a few days ago, not one of the people who left a comment had responded. But this person from a couple of days back did respond, and they confirmed that they had actually lost 2 fish in the tank that they claimed to have cycled faster than this method. Now, those fish may have not made it for other reasons, but in a brand new aquarium, losing fish often points to an incomplete cycle, even if you think you're good to go. And that brings me on to my next point, which is why we actually take the time to cycle our aquariums in the first place, and in short, it's because of the nitrogen cycle. This is a process where we take toxic ammonia and then we convert it into toxic nitrite, and then we convert that into safer nitrate. Leftover fish food, fish waste, and organic matter such as plant leaves start to produce ammonia and ammonium as they decompose in your aquarium. Multiple research papers have also found that fish excrete ammonia via their gills when they metabolize protein, which can be a leading cause of ammonia in aquariums where you use a high protein fish food. Ammonium is usually safe in most aquarium setups, but ammonia is toxic because it can burn the gills of your fish and make it more difficult for your fish to get rid of the ammonia inside of their body, which can cause damage to their organs over time. The beneficial microorganisms that we grow during the cycle transform the ammonium and the toxic ammonia into something called nitrite, which is also toxic. Some sources do claim that nitrite is less harmful than ammonia, but in my opinion, both of them seriously hurt your fish, just in different ways. High nitrite levels can prevent a fish's blood from being able to carry oxygen, which combined with the burns to its gills from the ammonia reduce its total oxygen uptake and can prove fatal. Luckily, another group of beneficial microorganisms can convert the toxic nitrite into nitrate, which is similar to ammonium in the sense that it's usually safe in the average aquarium and unlikely to reach dangerous levels. Now, I know a few of those words sound very similar, but another way to look at it is that ammonium and nitrate are generally considered safe, while ammonia and nitrite are toxic. Now, the exact amounts of these toxins, as well as how long your fish has been exposed to them, can make a difference, and there is also some species of fish that are far tougher than others due to the conditions they've evolved in the wild. But in theory, fish can recover from small amounts of damage if conditions do improve in their aquarium, but personally I just don't see any reason to risk it when a proper cycle is relatively easy to achieve. So now that I've covered all of that, it's time to actually set the tank up by adding a substrate, hardscape and any tank accessories. For this particular tank I'm using an inert sand which won't affect the water parameters in any way. Some substrates like high-end aquasoils can release ammonia when they are first added to the tank, while certain sands such as aragonite can raise your pH. But with this method, neither of these should be a problem. As you can see, I've added around 2 centimeters of substrate, but deeper substrates can be helpful in some tanks because they offer more surface area for the beneficial microorganisms to grow, allowing different types of colonies to form. Next, I'm adding the hardscape, and in this case, I'm using an inert lava rock which won't alter the water parameters in this tank, but it will offer a lot of surface area for beneficial microorganisms to colonize. Keep in mind that certain types of hardscape can increase or decrease your aquarium's pH. For example, limestone-based rocks such as Sirius stone release calcium carbonate into the water, which will increase your tank's pH and help certain bacteria colonies grow. On the flip side of that, certain types of driftwood and a lot of aquasoils can lower your pH, which can slow bacteria growth down. With that out of the way, it's time to fill the tank up with tap water. Some of the microorganisms that we need to cycle the tank require phosphate and alkalinity, but tap water should contain enough of both to get the job done. If you live in an area that uses well water or choose to use a reverse osmosis pump, then you might want to try and re-add some of these to your tank to get the cycle complete as quickly as possible, but in most cases, if you're using tap water, this won't be an issue. Once the aquarium is full, I use a tap water conditioner to remove chlorine and chloramines because these chemicals can harm the microorganisms that we need. It's important to note that most water sources will contain the different types of archaea and bacteria that we need to cycle the tank, so there's no need to go out and buy a bacteria in a bottle product, but more on those later. Next, it's time to set up the aquarium filter, and I've chosen to use a small hanging back filter for this particular tank, but I've used this exact method with canister filters, sponge filters, box filters and under gravel filters without issue. I do like to replace the cartridges in my filters with some 30 ppi foam for biological filtration, and then I add a small amount of filter floss to act as mechanical filtration and catch the debris. It is probably a good idea to customize the filter media that you're getting if you are using a hang-on back filter, but I have a dedicated video going over the process that I link in this video's description. This process drastically increases the amount of surface area available in the filter for beneficial microorganisms to grow on, helping to cycle the tank and keep the water clear. Another thing to note is that I'm not using a light during the cycling process with this particular method because there's no plants in there. If you already have your aquarium light, feel free to place it on the aquarium at this stage, but don't turn it on until the cycle is complete because the dark environment prevents algae growth. At this stage, I'm going to take a water parameter reading, and I'll explain why a little later in the video, but it's not essential for your own aquarium and this one can be skipped. Finally, I add an ammonia source to feed the beneficial microorganisms that we need to develop in the tank over the coming weeks. I use Dr. Tim's ammonia solution because it's very easy to find where I live, but a bunch of different brands have similar products on the market that should all perform to the same level. For this setup, setup, I'm just going to follow the regular instructions on the label of Dr. Tim's ammonia solution, which will dose the tank to 2 ppm ammonia, but depending on the setup I have half this dose and ran the cycling process at 1 ppm ammonia and it works perfectly fine. That said, if you are cycling to 1 ppm of ammonia with a half dose of your ammonia solution, it will reduce the total bioload that the tank can handle when you stock it, so it is important to avoid overstocking the tank. An alternative to an ammonia solution is to add a small amount of fish food because it will release ammonia as it starts to decompose. Personally, I prefer to use the ammonia solution because it's far easier to accurately measure and dose the amount of ammonia that you are adding to the tank, while fish food can be unpredictable. But with all that done, the tank is set up and dosed with an ammonia source so the microorganisms have food, so there's not much else to do at this stage. Over the next few weeks, the beneficial microorganisms in your aquarium will gradually grow to convert the toxic ammonia into toxic nitrite, which will then be converted into nitrate. As I mentioned before, both pH and water temperature affect how quickly the cycling process will happen in your tank, and this is why companies like Fritz Aquatics recommend specific conditions for their specific bacteria in a bottle products. In my case, I'm cycling in less than ideal conditions because my tap water has a pH of around 6.4 and I started this cycle during the winter, so the water temperature is around 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a far cry from the optimal pH of 7.3 and 8.0 and an optimal temperature of between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius or 77 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit that Fritz recommends for their specific product. But as you'll see throughout the process, the tank still cycles without issue. It just takes longer, and depending on the exact setup you're running, it can double the required time. It's also important to note that there's actually different types of microorganisms at work here, not just bacteria. While beneficial bacteria colonies such as Nitrobacter, Nitrospira, Nitrococcus and Nitrosomonas will grow over the coming weeks to process the ammonia and nitrite, there's also archaea. Multiple independent research papers have found that depending on the water temperature and pH, beneficial archaea colonies can actually convert more ammonia into nitrite than beneficial bacteria colonies. Unfortunately, unlike bacteria, archaea can't be stored in spore form, so we can't buy it in a bottle in shops to speed things up. They just have to be left to develop naturally in the aquarium. I've actually cycled so many aquariums using this method now that I've honestly lost count of the number of tanks I've used it on, but they all go through the same 6-stage process. I want to walk you through each of these stages so you get a better idea of what's actually happening in your aquarium and what to expect if you choose this method for your tanks, while I also want to try and touch on some very popular and common cycling myths that just aren't accurate. So let's start with stage 1, and you may remember earlier how I mentioned I was taking a water parameter reading even though it's not necessary for you in your own tanks. This is why I did it, because right after I filled the tank with fresh tap water, I did a water parameter test and found no ammonia, nitrite or nitrate in the tank. Now, depending on where you live, your tap water results may look different directly out of the tap, because the World Health Organization allows for up to 50 milligrams per litre or up to 50 ppm of nitrate to be in tap water, because it's far less toxic than ammonia and nitrite. That means that you may see a nitrate reading on any test kits you used at this stage before the beneficial microorganisms have a chance to do anything. Although optional, checking your water parameters directly after you fill the tank can give you an idea of what to expect moving forward without any nitrate in your tap water throwing you off later in the process. The second part of stage 1 is testing the water right after dosing ammonia, and again, this is an optional step. In my case, within minutes of the test I've just shown you, I added the Dr. Tim's ammonia solution at the recommended dose, which raised the ammonia level to around 2 ppm as you can see in this clip. This kickstarts the whole cycling process by providing providing food for the microorganisms that we need to grow in the tank to keep our fish, shrimp, snails and plants safe. As I mentioned, this water parameter check is also optional, but it can give you confirmation that you've dosed the ammonia in the tank correctly and the cycle is about to start. Now we move on to stage 2, which can start anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks into the cycle depending on your tank's water temperature and pH. As you can see, the ammonia levels have begun to drop because certain bacteria and archaea are converting it into nitrite, which causes the nitrite levels to rise. As these microorganism colonies grow in size, they'll be able to process larger amounts of ammonia in shorter periods of time. The nitrate is still at 0 ppm, which tells us that the first part of the cycle is currently underway. Keep in mind that if you do have nitrate in your tap water, you may get a hit on your nitrate test at this stage, which may lead you to believe that you are further along in the cycling process than you actually are. Stage 3 usually takes a few weeks to kick in, but again your tank's water temperature and pH will play a role in this. I know that the ammonia levels seem the same as it was in stage 2, but these test kits aren't 100% accurate, so it could just be a misreading. What is clear is that both nitrite and nitrate levels have jumped up significantly in the tank. Now this stage is also where a common myth often shows up, with some people thinking that a tank is fully cycled as soon as they see a nitrate hit on their test kit. I don't know how to make this any clearer, but this is simply not true. As you can see with my test shown in the video clip, there's still a fair amount of ammonia and a lot of nitrite in the water, which can definitely harm your fish. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, some locations have nitrate in their tap water, proving that nitrate hits on your test kits does not mean that your tank is cycled. I class stage 4 as when the initial ammonia that you added to your tank a few weeks ago has all been used up, so you will need to add more to keep feeding your microorganisms. If you're using the fish food method as an ammonia source, then simply add more fish food as you did back at the start. In this particular tank, I also had to top off some water because of evaporation, and this is very common, so it's highly likely you'll have to do it in your own tank too. This is very easy to do. Just add more water to the tank, but don't forget to add a water conditioner to neutralize any chlorine or chloramine so you don't harm your microorganisms that are grown in here. Looking at the test results at this point, you might notice that my nitrate levels have actually went down compared to the previous stage, but this is not normal. It's completely normal and expected for your nitrate levels to be the same as the previous stage or even higher, and that is what I usually experience in the majority of my aquariums. I suspect that the drop in nitrate with this particular tank is because I've chosen to use a lot of lava rock for the hardscape. In theory, lava rock can provide the ideal environments for denitrifying bacteria, which can convert nitrate into nitrogen gas that will leave the aquarium and reduce nitrate levels. Now this is a controversial theory, but it's also difficult to prove either way because each lava rock varies in composition, but pumice stone, which is also formed during volcanic eruptions, has been shown to remove over 80% of nitrate from an aquarium when used in a similar way. Generally, you won't see a nitrate level decrease at this stage of the cycling process, so don't worry if yours is holding steady or increasing, it is completely normal. So moving forward to stage 5, and I class this as when your aquarium can take a fresh dose of ammonia and process it down to 0 ppm ammonia and 0 ppm nitrite in a short period of time. With this specific aquarium, the nitrate also seems to have dropped down to 0 ppm, but as I just mentioned, this is not normal, and the majority of my aquariums at this point of the cycle will normally have anywhere between 40 and 80 ppm nitrate. Different people have their own definitions of when an aquarium is cycled and safe for your fish. Most people, including myself, agree that it's usually safe to add fish once a dose of ammonia can be processed down to 0 ammonia and 0 nitrite within 24 hours of adding the dose. This is another reason why I personally prefer to use an ammonia solution instead of the fish food method for cycling, as it immediately provides that hit of ammonia for your beneficial microorganisms, while fish food takes time to decompose and release ammonia. So in short, stage 5 is all about continuing what you've been doing, and you keep redosing your ammonia source as needed until your tank can process ammonia and nitrite down to 0 ppm within 24 hours. And then personally I'd consider your tank cycled. Finally, we arrive at stage 6, which isn't necessary for everyone. If you're buying your fish from a local shop, then you can skip this step and move right into the stocking section of your tank, which I'll cover soon. However, a lot of people order their fish online these days, which means you have to wait for them to arrive. On top of that, it can take even longer to find a specific fish or a specific colour or pattern or tail shape if the fish isn't in stock yet. So if you fall into that category and you can't add your fish at this stage, you have two main choices. You can keep adding your ammonia source each day to maintain the cycle on the tank, as your microorganism colonies really should be fed to maintain their health. The other option is that you can add other creatures to your tank at this stage to hold the cycle for you. I'm in a similar situation to this with two of my new tanks, because at the time of recording the video it's the end of winter and it's still cold. I didn't want to risk shipping any shrimp from the other side of the country, so I chose to add some ram's horn snails to two of my tanks to hold the cycle. Snails eat a surprising amount of food relative to their size, and they can hold the bioload and maintain the health of your microorganisms with ease. It is worth taking note that ram's horn snails will breed in freshwater aquariums, especially if there's a surplus of food, so keep that in mind. If you do decide on using snails, you can get them in most pond or aquarium shops, and ram's horn snails are usually recommended, but other types of snails can work for holding the cycle. Keep in mind, I see snails as pets and I see them as part of the ecosystem of my aquarium, so I do intentionally add them to the tank. If you don't want snails in the tank, just keep dosing your ammonia. So now that the tank is cycled and safe and you have your fish, it's time to actually add them to the tank. But before I do that, I do like to perform a large water change, because the average aquarium will struggle to deal with the high nitrate levels in the tank at this stage. If you're going for a planted tank, I suggest you add your plants as soon as the tank is cycled, ideally a month before you introduce any shrimp. Just remember that once your plants are in the tank, turn on your aquarium light and set your light up according to your needs. Personally, I keep my lights on full brightness with a 6-hour photo period per day, and I have minimal issues with algae, but lighting is just one factor that influences algae growth. The reason I suggest you wait a month before you add any shrimp to the tank is because some plants can retain copper from fertilizers, and copper can be toxic to shrimp. But fish can usually handle a far higher copper level than shrimp, so you can add your fish at the same time you add your plants. Now, there is a debate between if you should drip acclimate your fish to your water parameters before adding them to the tank, or if you should just open the bag and pour them through a net to get rid of the water they came in and then add the fish directly to the tank, but that's definitely something you need to decide on. I've tried both methods and I've done a bit of research on that topic, and it does seem that just opening the bag and getting your fish into the tank as soon as possible is usually the best option, especially if you've shipped your fish from another area after ordering them online, because toxins can build up in that water. It's also worth noting that I've never had an ammonia spike in my tanks when I cycle it using this method, but I do still like to test the water parameters in my new tanks once per week for the first couple of months to monitor it. I do keep quite a lot of room temperature aquariums, and although ammonia doesn't tend to spike in those setups, nitrate can, so again it's just another reason to keep monitoring your water parameters, especially during the colder months. This is specific to room temperature or cold water aquariums because the bacteria that convert nitrite into nitrate can become less effective in cooler temperatures. This isn't really an issue with converting ammonia into nitrite because you have your beneficial archaea colonies in the tank that help your bacteria, and archaea is highly efficient even at lower temperatures when compared to bacteria. If you do see either of these spike up after adding your fish, just do a water change and there shouldn't be any long-term problems. As I mentioned earlier, most aquariums won't naturally be able to maintain low nitrate levels over the long term. High nitrates are generally safe for fish, but they can cause problems if they get too high. The majority of my personal tanks are heavily planted with fast-grown stem and floating plants that are easily able to manage my nitrate levels, but as you can see with this specific tank, I took a minimalist approach and added 3 slow-grown Anubias plants. This means that both nitrate and the total dissolved solids in this tank can build up over time and become an issue further down the line. Because of that, I'm planning on doing a 25% partial water change every month because it fits my maintenance schedule for my other aquariums perfectly. If I find that that isn't enough to keep nitrate and TDS levels stable, I'll simply bump it up to a 50% partial water change, or I'll do the water changes more frequently. But this tank completed its cycle over a month ago, and as you can see, I've got 2 ram's horn snails in here and 5 medaka, and there's been no problems with ammonia or nitrite or nitrate levels so far. Earlier in the video, I did mention that one big drawback of this method is how long it takes to cycle the tank, but the good news is that depending on your specific water parameters, there can be a couple of ways to speed things up. The first option is to use a bacteria in a bottle product, which are popular but can be controversial. There's plenty of these products on the market these days, but most brands don't give you a lot of details on what's actually inside the bottle or how to use it to get the best results. That's why I mentioned Fritz Aquatics in their Fritzzyme 7 product earlier, because they have a great user guide that clearly explains everything that you need. It even goes over the ideal water parameters and pH levels required for their product to get the best results, and touches on the requirement of phosphate and KH. If your aquarium's water parameters will fit these ranges, this can definitely be worth a try, but unfortunately out of all of my aquariums, not one of them meet these requirements. The second approach that a lot of people use is to introduce some filter media from an already established aquarium. Another option, if you have something like a canister filter or a hang-on back filter, is to literally just swap some of the media between the old tank and your new tank. There are ways that you can still do this if you are brand new to the hobby and cycling your very first aquarium, as some aquarium stores will squeeze their sponge filters into a bottle for you so you can seed your aquarium with the gunk from their tanks. Now in theory, these can shorten your cycling times, but personally I prefer to start each tank from scratch. This way each tank builds its own community of microorganisms that are specifically suited to that tank's needs. As I've mentioned several times, water temperature and pH play a big role in the balance of your bacteria and archaea colonies in your tank. Now an example that I'm trying to get across here is that my betta fish tank is usually kept at 27 degrees Celsius with a higher pH because of the Sirius stone hardscape releasing calcium carbonate into the water. Meanwhile, the medaka tank that I cycled in this video currently sits at around 18 degrees Celsius and has a pH of around 6.4. Bacteria generally do better in warmer water with a higher pH, while archaea become more dominant in cooler temperatures regardless of the pH of your tank. Because of these differences between the two aquariums, I'm really not sure how much benefit trying to switch the filter media between the two would actually achieve, and that's why I just like to let the tank naturally cycle. I do want to quickly touch on using plants to reduce your cycling time, as this is a valid option with a lot of other cycling methods. But the high ammonia level that you dose into your tank with this specific method can become problematic for certain plants, potentially causing them to melt. So I personally don't recommend you try to speed things up with plants with the dark start method. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. As I mentioned back at the start of the video, I'm not saying that this is the best way or only way to cycle your tank. There's other methods that work. This is simply my preferred method. Thanks for watching the video guys, especially if you made it to the end. Have a good day and good luck with your first aquarium if you are brand new to the hobby.